Hi. I'd like to thank you, Abraham and Jerry and Esther. My mother passed away last November, and my brother-in-law told me, he's a physician, come next week, she's recovering, you know. And the next thing I knew, she came right into my head and appeared before me. I didn't recognize her at first. She looked 25 years old, sporting a tiara, sort of smiling like, I'm here. And we had this mini quick conversation. And then she was off to party, and I was basically going to deal with my siblings who were not going to be in the same frame of mind at all as me. And then I didn't hear from her for quite a while until July, when I was in a James Van Praagh seminar on psychic development. And then my mother started coming through again. And I was told that basically it was easy for her to come through as she was raising her vibrational level up. But that she was moving further away from me. And so it was becoming more difficult for me to hear her or communicate with her. And
Well, it's not actually her raising her vibrational level up, because at her moment of making her transition, her all resistance has subsided. When you withdraw your focus from the physical, as you do in what you call the death experience, your vibration immediately raises to that of that which you really are. That's what we're talking about all the time, about letting go of resistance and allowing yourself to be in that high, non-resistant vibration. But when someone makes their transition, and you are aware of them, your memory of who they are holds your vibration regarding them in a more resistant place than it really is. In other words, it's harder for you. The reason that in the beginning it was easy for you to reach her is because your desire was so strong, and it just overrode any resistance that you had. There's something really lovely about that time. Everyone's sort of in shock, and you're coming together as a family, and the normal things of your life that you're normally resistant about. It's an interesting thing. People can be resistant about not enough money, and resistant about relationships, and resistant about all kinds of things. And when something like that occurs, you begin focusing in a different place, and even though you're unhappy about somebody making their transition, often you are less resistant around those times than you are on a normal day-to-day basis. We're not kidding you. So that's the reason that you were able to have that initial interaction. But we just want to say that later on, as she talked to you less and less, it wasn't because she was getting further away from you because her vibration was raising, because her vibration was already raised. When your ability to interact with them is about what's going on in your vibration. It's about two things. It's about the same two things that everything's about. It's about your interest in the topic and the degree of resistance that you have about it. And so as time goes on, usually after someone makes their transition, your desire to interact with them fades too. Esther talked to her father after he made his transition every night for weeks and weeks and weeks. But in time, one night, she was having a hard time thinking of something to talk about because they'd sort of chewed it all over. And he said, you know, Esther, we don't have to keep doing this every night. And Esther didn't like that. It felt like he was pulling away from her. And she said, well, I'm not ready to say goodbye. And he said, well, then if you think of something, let's just keep saying hello.
Okay.
You get the sense of what we're talking about? It's your frequency that is the variable in this situation.
So then how do I get rid of or, minimize any resistance to facilitate talking to my mother or my grandfather or...
Well, as we said, there are two things that are required. One is your interest in the subject. In other words, when you want something, these are the variables in the creation of anything. When you want it and are not resistant to it, then it is. So if you really want something and you have some resistance, sometimes the power of your desire can facilitate it even though there's resistance. If you don't care that much about it and you don't have any resistance, sometimes you can facilitate it. You see, the optimum is to really want something to which you have no resistance. And so what we would do if we were standing in your physical shoes, we would talk about the benefit to you and the benefit to whoever you're talking to. Okay. Talk about why you want it, what you want and why you want it. And we would say things, if you really want to come into vibrational alignment with who you really are, the desire that if you could activate the following desire within you, it would put you in a really good place. I want to know you, Mother, as you now are. I want to feel you as you now are. I want to know the sweetness of the pure positive energy that is you. I want to know you in your non-resistant state of being. But if it's things like, I want to chew over something that happened when I was 5, or I want to know the details, that's not where she is. In other words, you want to activate who she is now, right, not who she was when she was in her physical form. Right. So as you bring yourself to that keen place, Jerry and is always talking, the more as they travel around the country, he's been everywhere and had experiences everywhere. So there's hardly a road that they travel that he doesn't have some fun excursion from the past that he can relate to Esther. And often it reminds him of his childhood or his family. And he said the other day, I never did ask my mother that question. I should have asked her that question when I could. And then he said, and I don't think my sister or brother would remember either. And Esther said, probably not, because you were the oldest of them. And then Esther said, my sister, my older sister, remembers many things that I don't remember because she was at a place of having a broader experience than I was having. And then they both said, we should ask those questions while there's someone still around that might have some memory of them. And then they both looked at each other and said, or not, realizing that none of that has any relevancy to who you now are. And we promise you that your dearly departed are not eager to discuss those things. Now, it's possible you could pick up on the thought forms of that which they were, because those thought forms are as alive and well as they ever were, and they are coalescing by law of attraction, and you could tap into them just like you could tap into a lingering radio signal. But it's not who they now are.
Okay. And I have an unrelated question. I've been involved in a lawsuit for 7 years, and I've heard what Abraham has to say about the law and lawsuits and all that stuff, and I agree with it on the whole. It's just that every time I felt like walking away from this, I felt like my inner being was saying, no, you have to fight this one. It's part of your transformational process. And I feel it has been very personally transformational for me. But I also feel like the case is at a point, it's at the Supreme Court now, they have to decide on whether or not to hear it or not. And in a way, it doesn't really matter what they choose to do, because I know what I'm going to write essentially in my expose. I don't know what I'm going to call it yet, but that's where my case is. It's just that I'd like to understand what was going on with me better, that was pushing me forward in this direction, because I felt, on the one hand, this is not logical, but this is what I feel.
Well, it's interesting to us because you said this is off the subject, or that you wanted to change the subject, and yet it's not a changed subject at all for this reason. We talked about who your mother is now that she has reemerged in a non-physical, this pure positive energy being. And we talked about how you have the ability, standing right here still in physical form, of finding a frequency that matches who she now is and having ongoing dialogues, or you can remember who she once was, tap into that vibration and have ongoing dialogues. In other words, because every thought that has ever been thought still exists. So what we're getting at is you could tap into who she really is or who she was, and you could still have vivid relationship that is real in the moment. So we want you to realize that in the same way that your mother is reemerged in a non-physical, that your inner being stands in that place of pure positive energy also. And so we are not in agreement that your inner being standing over there in the place that you are is calling you into a lawsuit. In other words, your inner being, now it may be that the details of that struggle have caused you to expand, and the source within you is standing there calling you toward that expansion,
Right.
but your inner being is not, and that, if that's what you're talking about, being called toward what you've come to know as a result of that, then that's an entirely different thing than the source within you calling you into some sort of contesting battle.
Right.
So the reason that we want to point out to you that we're really talking about the same thing in both discussions here is because the expanded non-physical version of you is always calling you toward that good feeling place. Always calling you toward that good feeling place.
Okay.
So in the same way that you sort of want to sometimes keep what was stirred up, what is it about, in other words, what is it, an expose is about pointing out the wrongdoing of someone.
Well, actually, it's more about where I think things should go, where I think that they should move toward. It's not really, it's sort of, the stare decisis that is just a jumping off point of, where it should go to, heal the world and, solve a whole lot of issues that, aren't being resolved.
We just want you to know that there's a lot of unnecessary junk in that vibration.
Okay.
Even in the words to heal the world introduces the junk of the sick world.
Okay.
In other words, there's a big difference between going because everyone, you and everyone else, is creating in this vibrational reality a better world. But no one moves toward the better world at the same time that they're looking back at the condition that caused them to ask for that. And so at some point you have to decide that it has served you and it has caused you to be this, and then you have to be this. You have to move in the direction of that. We like what you're saying, that it doesn't matter in either case, because, in other words, if the Supreme Court decides to hear the case, it will just prolong your ability to be who you've become as a result of it.
I understand. Thank you.